"You're too old to hold him." Those 6 words shattered my heart in front of an entire church. I never imagined that the person saying them would be my own daughter. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 68 years old, a retired elementary school teacher. And until that Sunday morning, I believed family bonds could survive almost anything. The day was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life. My grandson Noah was being baptized at St. Andrew's Church, a beautiful brick church about 15 minutes outside of Columbus, Ohio. I had been looking forward to that day for months. I bought a new navy blue dress, had my hair professionally styled, and even arrived 40 minutes early because I didn't want to miss a single second of the ceremony. The church was already filling with relatives and friends when I walked through the front doors. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting colorful reflections across the wooden pews. The atmosphere felt warm and joyful. Everywhere I looked, people were smiling, hugging, and taking photos. I remember thinking how lucky Noah was to be surrounded by so many people who loved him. My daughter Jennifer stood near the front with her husband, Daniel, holding baby Noah in her arms. Noah looked adorable in his white baptism outfit, sleeping peacefully despite all the activity around him. When I saw him, my heart melted instantly. I had only seen him a handful of times during his first year because Jennifer always seemed to have a reason why visits were difficult. Sometimes she said they were busy. Other times she claimed Noah wasn't feeling well, or that the timing wasn't good. I tried not to take it personally. New parents have a lot on their plates. At least that's what I kept telling myself. As guests continued arriving, I noticed something else. Jennifer barely acknowledged me. She smiled and chatted with friends, coworkers, and even distant relatives she hadn't seen in years. But when our eyes met, her smile disappeared almost immediately. It wasn't new behavior, but it still hurt. We hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Jennifer called me every day. A time when we shared secrets, celebrated birthdays together, and spent entire weekends shopping or watching movies. Somewhere along the way, things changed. I wasn't sure exactly when. I only knew that over the past few years, she seemed to pull farther away no matter how hard I tried to stay connected. Still, I told myself that today wasn't about me. It was Noah's special day. Whatever tension existed between Jennifer and me could wait. The ceremony began right on schedule. Families filled the pews while the pastor welcomed everyone. Noah woke briefly during the service and looked around with wide, curious eyes. The sight made several people laugh softly. I couldn't stop smiling. Every grandparent in that room probably understood exactly how I felt. Watching the next generation grow is a gift that never gets old. When the baptism concluded, everyone applauded. Cameras flashed. People stood up and congratulated Jennifer and Daniel. The church quickly transformed from a quiet sanctuary into a lively celebration. Guests gathered near the front to greet the family and take pictures. I waited patiently, giving others a chance to congratulate them first. Then I finally walked toward my daughter. My heart was full of pride and love. Noah was awake now, staring up at the lights above him. As I reached out with a smile and gently opened my arms, hoping to hold my grandson for just a moment, I had no idea that the next few seconds would change everything. For a brief moment, I thought everything was normal. I was smiling, my arms slightly extended toward Noah, waiting for Jennifer to lean forward and let me hold him. Instead, her expression changed instantly. The warmth disappeared from her face as though someone had flipped a switch. She took a small step backward and tightened her grip on Noah. At first, I assumed she was adjusting her hold on him. Then she looked directly at me and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "No, Mom. I do not think that is a good idea." I froze. My smile remained on my face for a second longer before confusion began replacing it. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. Several relatives standing nearby stopped talking. The cheerful atmosphere around us suddenly felt different. Jennifer glanced around as if she wanted an audience. "You are getting older," she said. "I would rather not take any chances." I stared at her, not fully understanding what she was implying. Then she delivered the sentence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "You are not as steady as you used to be." The words landed harder than I can describe. I heard an uncomfortable silence spread through the group around us. A few people exchanged glances. Others looked down at the floor. Nobody seemed to know what to say. My hands slowly dropped back to my sides. I had never dropped a child in my life. I had spent more than 30 years teaching elementary school students. I had raised Jennifer by myself after her father passed away. I had babysat nieces, nephews, neighbors, and friends' children over the decades. Yet in that moment, my daughter spoke to me as though I were incapable of safely holding my own grandson for 30 seconds. "Mom, do not make this a big deal," Jennifer continued. "We are just being careful. Being careful." The phrase echoed in my mind. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but the way she said it felt calculated. Daniel shifted awkwardly beside her. I noticed him open his mouth slightly, then close it again. He looked uncomfortable, but he did not challenge her. Noah, completely unaware of the tension, stared curiously at the adults surrounding him. I forced myself to stay calm. The last thing I wanted was a scene inside a church on my grandson's baptism day. "Of course," I said softly. "I understand." The truth was, I did not understand at all. Jennifer gave a short nod and immediately turned toward another group of guests. Just like that, the conversation was over. Or at least it was for her. For me, the humiliation lingered. I stepped away from the crowd and moved toward the back of the church. Every smile I had carried into the building that morning seemed to fade with each step. As I sat alone in an empty pew, I tried convincing myself not to cry. I focused on the stained glass windows. I focused on the flowers near the altar. I focused on anything except the knot growing in my chest. Then something strange happened. One by one, several relatives began glancing in my direction. Not with pity, not with judgment, with concern. My cousin Linda approached first. She sat beside me and gently touched my arm. "Are you okay?" she asked. Before I could answer, I noticed two other family members watching us from across the room. Their expressions were serious, almost troubled. It was the same look I had seen earlier during Jennifer's comment, a look that suggested they knew something I did not. Linda hesitated as though she wanted to say more. Then she looked over her shoulder toward Jennifer and lowered her voice. "Margaret," she whispered, "there are things happening that you need to know. Things that do not make sense." My heart sank. Because for the first time that day, I realized Jennifer's behavior might not have been about my age at all. Linda's words stayed with me long after she walked away. I sat quietly in the pew, watching guests laugh and mingle near the front of the church, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. What did she mean by things that did not make sense? Jennifer had embarrassed me. Yes, but family disagreements happen. I wanted to believe this was simply another painful misunderstanding. Yet the expression on Linda's face told a different story. It was the look of someone carrying a burden she was not sure she should share. A few minutes later, the congregation began moving toward the fellowship hall where the reception was being held. Round tables covered with white linens filled the room. There were trays of pastries, fruit, coffee, and sandwiches. Children ran between tables while relatives caught up on each other's lives. Normally, I would have enjoyed the celebration. Instead, I felt like an outsider looking through a window at someone else's family gathering. I found a seat near the back corner of the room and poured myself a cup of coffee. As I sat there, I noticed something strange. Several family members kept glancing toward Jennifer. Not admiringly, not affectionately. Their expressions carried concern, confusion, and in some cases disappointment. It was subtle, but impossible to ignore once I noticed it. Then my brother Robert approached my table. Robert was not the type of man who enjoyed gossip. He spent most family events talking about fishing, baseball, or home improvement projects. If he came looking for me, there was usually a reason. He sat down slowly and folded his hands. "How are you holding up?" he asked. I forced a smile. "I have had better mornings." Robert nodded. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he sighed heavily. "Margaret, there is something I have been wondering about for months." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" He looked around to make sure nobody was listening. "Jennifer tells people you do not want to be involved with Noah." I stared at him. "What?" "That is what she has been saying." I felt as though the floor had shifted beneath me. "That is not true." "I know it is not true," Robert replied. "That is why I never understood it." My pulse quickened. Over the past year, several relatives had grown distant. Birthday invitations seemed to disappear. Family updates stopped arriving. I had blamed busy schedules, changing lives, and simple misunderstandings. Suddenly another possibility entered my mind. What exactly has she been telling people? I asked. Robert looked uncomfortable. She says you rarely call. She says you are not interested in babysitting. She says you prefer spending time with friends instead of family. I almost laughed from disbelief. The reality was the complete opposite. I had called countless times. I had offered help whenever Noah was sick. I had volunteered to babysit more times than I could remember. Most of those offers had been politely declined. Why would she say that? I whispered. Robert shook his head. I do not know. Before I could respond, another voice joined the conversation. It was my cousin Emily. She pulled out a chair and sat beside us. I thought I was the only one hearing those stories, she said quietly. My heart sank even further. Emily explained that Jennifer had told several relatives similar things. Over time, people had begun believing that the distance between me and Noah was my choice. The realization hit me like a wave. While I had spent months wondering why family members seemed colder toward me, a completely different narrative had been spreading behind my back. The most painful part was that nobody had asked for my side. They simply accepted what they heard. I looked across the room toward Jennifer. She was laughing with friends while holding Noah in her arms. From a distance she appeared happy, confident, and completely at ease. But for the first time that day I began seeing something else. This was not an isolated comment made during a stressful moment. It was part of a pattern. And if Robert and Emily were right, that pattern had been quietly shaping how my entire family viewed me for a very long time. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Conversations continued around me. Plates clinked against tables, children laughed, and guests congratulated Jennifer and Daniel on the beautiful ceremony. Yet everything felt distant, as though I were listening from another room. I could not stop thinking about what Robert and Emily had told me. For months, maybe even years, people had been hearing a version of me that did not exist. A grandmother who was uninterested. A mother who kept her distance. A woman who chose other priorities over family. None of it was true. The painful part was realizing how many opportunities had quietly disappeared because of those stories. Family gatherings where I had not been invited. Photos shared without me. Milestones I learned about weeks later. Suddenly they all seemed connected. I was still sitting at the table when Daniel's mother, Carol, approached me. Carol and I had always been cordial, though we were never especially close. She pulled out a chair and sat beside me. Her expression was careful, almost hesitant. Margaret, can I ask you something? She said. Of course, I replied. She looked down briefly before meeting my eyes. Why did you stop visiting Noah? The question hit me immediately. I never stopped visiting Noah, I answered. Carol blinked. Jennifer told us you preferred keeping some distance. I shook my head. I have asked to visit dozens of times. For several seconds Carol simply stared at me. The confusion on her face was genuine. That is not what we were told. My chest tightened. Another person. Another family member who had been hearing the same narrative. Carol explained that over the past year Jennifer often mentioned how difficult it was because I was not very involved. She spoke about it casually enough that nobody questioned it. The comments were never dramatic. They were small observations slipped into ordinary conversations. Looking back, it was surprisingly effective. A person does not need one big lie when 100 small suggestions accomplish the same thing. As Carol spoke, I noticed someone standing across the room. Linda. She caught my eye and gave me a look that seemed to say she had more to tell me. Much more. About 20 minutes later, many guests began leaving. The reception was winding down. Jennifer remained busy thanking people for coming. Daniel carried gifts toward their vehicle in the parking lot. I considered leaving quietly. Part of me wanted to go home, close the curtains and forget the entire day had happened. But another part of me needed answers. Before I could make a decision, Linda approached again. This time she seemed nervous. She sat beside me and lowered her voice. Margaret, there is something I have never told you. My heart immediately started racing. What is it? She glanced toward the parking lot to make sure nobody was nearby. About 8 months ago, Jennifer called me. I listened carefully. She was upset about money, Linda continued. She said things were difficult. That did not surprise me. Raising a child was expensive. Then she asked me something strange. Linda paused. She wanted to know whether I thought you still had access to the money from your house. I felt the blood drain from my face. My old house. The house I had sold 3 years earlier. The house I loved. The house I gave up for one reason only: to help Jennifer when her family was facing financial disaster. I had never regretted helping my daughter. Not once. But hearing those words now sent a chill through me. Because for the first time all day, a frightening possibility entered my mind. What if this was never about my age? What if it was never about Noah's safety? What if Jennifer had been pushing me away for an entirely different reason, one connected to something she believed I still had? After Linda shared what Jennifer had asked about my house money, I sat in stunned silence. The reception hall was nearly empty now. Volunteers were stacking chairs, collecting decorations, and packing away leftover food. Outside the large windows, the afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent. Yet I barely noticed any of it. My thoughts kept returning to the same question. Why would Jennifer care about money that no longer existed? 3 years earlier, when her family faced financial disaster, I had sold my home. It was not a small decision. That house had been filled with memories. It was where Jennifer learned to ride a bicycle. It was where she celebrated birthdays, graduations, and holidays. Every room carried a piece of our history. But when she called me in tears, terrified that they might lose everything, I did not hesitate. I met with a realtor within days. The house sold quickly in the hot market. After taxes and fees, I handed over nearly everything I received. The money helped eliminate debt, catch up overdue bills, and stabilize their finances. I never considered it a sacrifice. I considered it what a mother does when her child is hurting. Jennifer thanked me repeatedly back then. She cried when I handed her the check. She promised she would never forget what I had done. Looking back, those promises seem strangely distant now. Linda, are you sure? I finally asked. Absolutely, she replied. The conversation always felt odd to me. She kept asking whether you had invested any money, or hidden some away. I shook my head. There had never been hidden money. I moved into a modest condominium after selling the house. My retirement income covered my expenses comfortably, but there was no secret fortune waiting somewhere. The entire situation made no sense. Before we could continue, someone approached our table. It was Daniel. He looked exhausted. The smile he had worn throughout the reception had disappeared. There you are, he said softly. His eyes moved between Linda and me. Can I talk to you for a minute, Margaret? Linda immediately stood. I will leave you two alone. As she walked away, Daniel pulled out a chair and sat across from me. For several moments he simply stared at the table. It was obvious something was weighing heavily on him. I am sorry about earlier, he finally said. I knew exactly what he meant. Thank you, I replied. But you did not say those things. Daniel looked uncomfortable. No. But I should have handled it differently. He rubbed his forehead and released a long breath. Things have been difficult lately. I studied his face carefully. He looked older than I remembered. More tired. More stressed. Are you and Jennifer okay? I asked. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He hesitated before answering. We have had some challenges. His response was polite, but it did not sound complete. Then he glanced around to make sure nobody was nearby. Margaret, has Jennifer ever talked to you about investments? My heart immediately skipped a beat. Investments. He nodded slowly. Anything related to savings, property, retirement accounts, or money from the house sale. The room suddenly felt colder. First Linda. Now Daniel. Two completely separate conversations pointing toward the same subject. No. Ian suara tunasli. Why? Daniel opened his mouth as if he wanted to explain. Then he stopped. His expression changed. Almost like someone who had revealed too much already. Forget it, he said. It is probably nothing. But I could tell it was not nothing. Before I could press further, Jennifer appeared at the doorway. Her eyes landed on us immediately. The moment she saw Daniel sitting with me, her entire posture stiffened. She walked toward our table with surprising speed. There you are, she said to Daniel. Her voice sounded pleasant enough, but there was tension beneath it. Daniel stood quickly. I was just talking with Margaret. Jennifer forced a smile. Well, we should get going. Then she looked directly at me. For a brief second, something flashed across her face. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Fear. It was gone almost instantly, replaced by her usual composed expression. But I had seen it. And for the first time that day, I began wondering whether my daughter was not simply hiding the truth from everyone else. Maybe she was desperately trying to keep me from discovering it too. That night I barely slept. After returning to my condominium, I sat alone at my kitchen table long after sunset, replaying every conversation from the baptism. Linda's warning. Robert's concerns. Emily's observations. Carol's confusion. Daniel's questions about money. Individually, each conversation could have been dismissed as a misunderstanding. Together, they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Around midnight, I opened an old photo album. It was one of the few things I had managed to keep after selling my house. Page after page revealed memories of Jennifer growing up. There she was at 8 years old holding a science fair ribbon. There she was at 16 learning to drive. There she was on her college graduation day with tears in her eyes because she was the first person in our family to earn a degree. Looking at those photographs, I struggled to reconcile that young woman with the person who had humiliated me in front of dozens of people earlier that day. The next morning, I received an unexpected phone call from Linda. Her voice sounded serious. Margaret, I found something. My heart immediately began racing. What do you mean? I was cleaning out old files last night, she said. Do you remember when Jennifer was trying to save her business 3 years ago? Of course I remembered. It had been one of the most stressful periods of our lives. Jennifer and Daniel had invested heavily in a small marketing company. Then several major clients left unexpectedly. Bills piled up. Creditors were calling. Jennifer sounded terrified every time we spoke. I remember, I said. Well, I found copies of some emails. I sat up straighter. Emails. Jennifer sent them to me when she was asking for advice. Linda paused. Margaret, according to these messages, the financial situation was not nearly as bad as she described. I felt a chill run through me. What are you saying? I am saying she told family members they were on the verge of losing everything. But according to the documents she shared with me, they had options. Several options. I struggled to process what I was hearing. 3 years earlier, Jennifer had convinced me that immediate action was necessary. She had described an emergency. A crisis.
À situation requiert un urgent sacrifice.
That was the reason I sold my home so quickly. Are you sure? I asked. I am looking at the emails right now, Linda replied. Margaret, there is more. I gripped the phone tightly. What else? One message mentions that if you sold your house, it would solve problems much faster than restructuring debt. My stomach dropped. Faster. Not necessary. Not the only option. Simply faster. After the call ended, I sat motionless for several minutes. A painful realization was beginning to emerge. Had I been manipulated? The thought felt almost unbearable. Not because of the money. I would have helped Jennifer regardless. What hurt was the possibility that she had exaggerated the situation to secure the outcome she wanted. As I sat there, another memory surfaced. A conversation from nearly a year ago. Jennifer had casually asked whether I planned to update my estate documents. At the time I thought nothing of it. Adult children often discuss practical matters with aging parents. But now that conversation felt different. Suddenly every question about property, savings, investments, and inheritance seemed connected. Before I could organize my thoughts, my phone rang again. This time it was Daniel. His voice sounded nervous. Margaret, I need to talk to you. I immediately sensed something was wrong. What happened? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he finally spoke. There are things about the last few years that you do not know. And I think it is time someone told you the truth. Daniel asked if we could meet in person. 2 hours later, we sat across from each other in a quiet coffee shop about 10 minutes from my condominium. The lunch crowd had not arrived yet, and only a handful of customers occupied the tables around us. Daniel looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes, and he kept turning his coffee cup in slow circles without taking a sip. For several moments neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up. Margaret, before I say anything else, I need you to know that I never wanted things to become like this. My stomach tightened. Like what? He released a long breath. The distance. The tension. The way Jennifer has treated you. Hearing him acknowledge it out loud felt strangely validating. For years I had questioned myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was somehow responsible. Yet here was Jennifer's own husband confirming that something was wrong. Then tell me what happened, I said quietly. Daniel stared at the table for a few seconds before speaking. After you sold your house, everything changed. My heart sank. What do you mean? At first, Jennifer was grateful. She talked about your sacrifice all the time. She told everyone how much you had saved us. That matched my memories. During the months after the sale, Jennifer called frequently. She visited often. She seemed genuinely appreciative. But then something shifted, Daniel continued. I do not know exactly when. He paused. I think it started when people began praising you. I frowned. Praising me? He nodded. Family members admired what you did. Friends talked about it. Even some of our neighbors heard the story. Everywhere we went, people mentioned your generosity. I struggled to understand where this was going. That sounds harmless. It should have been, Daniel replied. But Jennifer started reacting differently. She hated being reminded that she needed help. His words unlocked something I had never considered. Jennifer had always been fiercely independent. Even as a child, she wanted to solve every problem herself. Asking for assistance embarrassed her. Over time, Daniel continued, she stopped viewing your sacrifice as an act of love. She started viewing it as a reminder. I sat silently, absorbing every word. A reminder of what? Daniel looked directly at me. That you rescued her. The statement lingered between us. Suddenly several memories began fitting together in ways they never had before. The growing distance. The canceled visits. The coldness. The awkward conversations. You think she resents me? I asked. I think she resents what your help represents, Daniel answered carefully. Every time someone complimented you, she felt judged. Every time someone mentioned your sacrifice, she felt smaller. I looked out the window. Cars passed by on the street while people went about ordinary lives, completely unaware that my understanding of my own daughter was changing by the minute. That still does not explain the story she told about me, I said. Daniel nodded slowly. No, it does not. His expression darkened. And that is the part that worries me. He leaned forward slightly. Margaret, over the past year, Jennifer became obsessed with one particular idea. My pulse quickened. What idea? Daniel hesitated. She convinced herself that you were hiding money. I stared at him in disbelief. That is ridiculous. I know, he replied immediately. But she believed it. She said nobody sells a house and ends up with so little left. She thought you were protecting investments or accounts that nobody knew about. The absurdity would have been laughable if it were not so disturbing. There was never any hidden money, I said firmly. I know that, Daniel replied. The problem is that Jennifer stopped listening to anyone who told her otherwise. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a sealed manila envelope. My heart immediately began racing. Daniel placed it on the table between us. I found this last week while organizing paperwork at home, he said quietly. And after what happened at the baptism, I think you need to see it. My eyes remained fixed on the manila envelope sitting between us. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade into the background. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. What is in it? I finally asked. Daniel looked uneasy. I have not shown it to anyone else. Slowly, I reached forward and opened the envelope. Inside were several printed pages, handwritten notes, and copies of emails. At first glance, none of it made sense. Then I noticed my name. Again and again. Nearly every document mentioned me. I began reading. The first email had been sent by Jennifer to a financial advisor about 14 months earlier. In it, she asked whether adult children could obtain information about a parent's assets without direct access to financial accounts. My stomach tightened. The next document contained notes from a conversation she had apparently recorded for herself. Several lines had been highlighted. One sentence immediately caught my attention. Mom is probably hiding more than she admits. I felt physically ill. Daniel watched silently as I continued reading. Another page contained a list of estimated assets. My condominium, my retirement account, my savings, even personal belongings. Someone had attempted to calculate my net worth. The figures were wildly inaccurate. In some cases they were more than double the actual amounts. This cannot be real, I whispered. Daniel nodded sadly. I wish it was not. I continued turning pages. What disturbed me most was not the money itself. It was the mindset behind it. The documents revealed months of suspicion. Jennifer had become convinced that I was secretly wealthy. Every normal explanation had been rejected. Every reassurance had been dismissed. In her mind, hidden money explained everything. Then I reached a page that made my hands tremble. It was an email draft. Apparently it had never been sent. The message began with the words, "People always think my mother is some kind of saint." I kept reading. The email described years of frustration. Jennifer complained that family members admired me. She complained that relatives compared her decisions to mine. She complained that whenever my name came up, people mentioned sacrifice, generosity, or responsibility. By the end of the message, one thing had become painfully clear. The issue was never really money. The money was only the excuse. The deeper problem was resentment. Long-standing resentment. Daniel seemed to read my expression. "You see it now, do you not?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "She thinks everyone admires me more than they admire her." Exactly. Daniel leaned back in his chair. At first it was subtle. Then it became an obsession. Every compliment directed toward you felt like criticism directed toward her. I stared at the documents spread across the table. Suddenly the baptism made more sense. The comments about my age. The stories told to relatives. The efforts to keep me distant from Noah. None of those actions were random. They were attempts to reduce my role in the family narrative. If people viewed me as uninvolved, weak, or unreliable, then perhaps they would stop seeing me as someone worthy of admiration. The realization broke my heart far more than the public humiliation itself. Because beneath all the anger and suspicion was my daughter. The little girl from my photo albums. The child I had spent decades loving. Before I could say anything else, Daniel reached into the envelope and removed one final document. Unlike the others, it was folded separately. "This is the reason I called you," he said. "Not the emails. Not the notes. This." He placed the paper in front of me. Across the top was a date from only 3 weeks earlier. Beneath it was a heading that immediately made my blood run cold. It was a meeting summary from an attorney's office. And next to the section labeled Purpose of Consultation was a sentence I never expected to read. Jennifer wanted advice regarding a future dispute involving my estate. For several moments I could not speak. I stared at the attorney's meeting summary as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less disturbing. A future dispute involving my estate. The phrase repeated over and over in my mind. I was healthy. I lived independently. I handled my own finances. I had not discussed inheritance issues with anyone in years. Yet somehow my daughter had already consulted an attorney about a potential conflict involving assets she believed I possessed. "When did you find this?" I asked quietly. "Last week," Daniel replied. It was mixed in with paperwork Jennifer left on her desk. I looked back down at the document. There were no accusations, no dramatic statements, and nothing illegal. But the implications were impossible to ignore. Someone does not schedule a consultation about a future estate dispute unless they are already thinking about future assets. Did she actually meet with the attorney? I asked. Daniel nodded. Yes. My chest tightened. Did she tell you? Not at first. Daniel looked exhausted. I only learned about it after finding the paperwork. I sat silently trying to process everything. The daughter I knew would never have viewed family relationships through the lens of money. Yet the evidence sitting on the table suggested that something had fundamentally changed. Then Daniel surprised me. There is one more thing you need to know. I looked up. What? He hesitated before answering. Jennifer has been telling people that you plan to leave everything to charity. I blinked in confusion. What? That is one of the reasons she became obsessed. I stared at him. The statement made no sense. I had never said anything remotely like that. I have never told anyone that. I know. Daniel nodded. But she convinced herself it was true. Suddenly another piece of the puzzle fell into place. If Jennifer believed I had hidden wealth and believed I intended to leave it elsewhere, then every interaction with me would be filtered through those assumptions. Every disagreement, every misunderstanding, every family gathering. It would explain why she seemed increasingly suspicious and defensive over the past several years. But something still bothered me. Why would she believe that? I asked. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Because she was looking for an explanation. For what? He sighed heavily. For why she never felt good enough. The answer caught me completely off guard. Daniel continued speaking before I could respond. Margaret, this was never really about money. It was never about property. It was not even about inheritance. He leaned forward slightly. Jennifer spent years comparing herself to you. My heart sank. That is ridiculous. No, it is sad, Daniel replied. She compared her parenting to your parenting, her career to your career, her choices to your choices. Every compliment you received felt like proof that she was failing somehow. I sat quietly, struggling to absorb what he was saying. Looking back, I could remember moments when Jennifer dismissed praise directed at me. Times when she changed the subject whenever relatives mentioned my sacrifices. Small reactions that seemed insignificant at the time. Perhaps they were not insignificant after all. Then Daniel said something that changed everything. Do you remember Noah's first birthday? Of course I remembered. I had not been invited. Jennifer claimed the gathering was extremely small because Noah was not feeling well. I accepted the explanation even though it hurt. Yes, I answered. Daniel looked directly at me. There were over 30 people there. The room seemed to spin for a moment. What? Almost the entire family attended. My throat tightened. Jennifer told me it was a small gathering. I know. Daniel's voice sounded heavy with regret. That was not true. Suddenly dozens of painful memories rushed back. Missed holidays. Last-minute cancellations. Events I heard about afterward. Family photos where I was mysteriously absent. For years I blamed circumstances. Now I was beginning to understand that many of those circumstances had been deliberately created. Then Daniel reached into the envelope once more and handed me a folded sheet of paper. Read the first paragraph, he said quietly. I unfolded the page. It was a letter written by Jennifer. And as my eyes moved across the opening lines, I realized it was never intended for me to see.